When we try to understand a community, a poor community, we need to remember that every community is unique. But there are some principles that you can apply to understand it. And these principles work in a proper definition of poverty. The problem is that we usually have a misleading definition of what poverty is. And this is because I believe that we have overvalued the economic definition of poverty. If we read the Encyclopedia Britannica or the Encyclopedia Wikipedia, something like that, we will immediately notice that when they refer to poverty, they are thinking of the lacking of means or the lacking of resources. So in that sense, poverty would be lacking clothing or lacking food or lacking shelter or lacking the means to provide for oneself those things. If we take that definition on board and we try to work with it to understand the community, we get misled. And we get misled because poverty is more than an economic problem. Poverty is more than lacking something. And that's why so many projects and so many governments and so many attempts to deal with poverty have failed. There are billions of dollars and euros that have been spent in trying to eradicate poverty, and they don't work. It seems like poverty is resistant to them and it just grows and grows and grows. And why? Because people think that by giving to the poor what they lack, they're going to make it disappear. And they don't understand that poverty really is a matter of understanding that it's a constellation of spiritual factors, psychological factors, relational factors, physical factors, and also that produce consequences as vulnerability. And so better definition of poverty needs to be sought. And what we have got to through experience, through our spiritual pilgrimage, through the reading of good sources of information, and through really working out what really works and what doesn't, is a definition that includes 6 or 7 features, which are very, very important for us. And the first one is isolation. You see, when you find isolation, it's very likely that you're finding poverty, but not in every case an isolated person is poor. But it's one of the elements of poverty. And what do I mean by isolation? Well, when we work with the poor, we tend to see them in mobs or in multitudes, in big groups, in neighborhoods where you go and you find house after house after house, all crammed together, and you tend to think that they're not isolated, unless you see deeply and you start observing and you notice that they are not organized and that they actually fear each other, and that they don't understand each other, so they cannot, out of fear and out of lack of organization, they cannot tackle the problems that they are facing together. But you know, isolation doesn't come alone. Isolation, in the case of the poor, comes together with a story of exploitation. One of the moments where we could see this exploitation in practice in the past was when the Indian or the indigenous kids would come to us for the first time. And you would notice that none of them would look to your eye, regardless that you would treat them well and you would invite them to look at your eye. They would always be looking down, and they would be shy and they would be fearsome, and you can understand why, unless you would refer to the past, when their master would beat them up or would slap on their faces just by looking to them, at their eye. Isolation, exploitation comes together with a situation of helplessness. For instance, what happens if a person who doesn't have a credit card, as I do, or enough money, as I do, because I have a profession and I make money out of it, or a bank account, as I do, or friends that have money and I can call and ask for a loan. or relatives with resources has a child who's sick and doesn't have any protection from the government or any kind of social services. What happens? In my homeland, that person cannot go to a hospital with a sick child, because the first thing they are going to say, okay, where is your card? Where is your credit? Give me a check, sign a check, or produce the money, whatever, you see, so that we will take the child. And they're changing the laws so that they will have to welcome the child, at least for the emergency, and then after the emergency they will let the child go. But the fact is that he is helpless. And because people are isolated and have had this terrible story of exploitation and live helplessly, they learn to become hopeless. And they're hopeless because their sense of well-being has been taken away from them. What would you expect from a person who has been taken to a different country and doesn't see any good in the future and doesn't see the things that bring joy to his or her life around to do? Well, just live a hopeless life. And that's another feature of the poor. But that also goes with other problem. The problem of seeing life in a circular way, without any progression that will make them go out of their situation. So, to give you an example, if they happen to have some money, they won't use this money to make an improvement in their vicious cycle, like getting a better education, building a better house, saving for tomorrow, buying themselves better clothing for winter, or something like that, or eating better because they're malnourished. No, they will invest that money in the next festivity. So what is the next festivity? New Year's Eve, or maybe the epiphany of the wise men. They never use their resources for progression. And it's very common to find them. And because of that, you see that they don't have a sense of future. It's natural to say that they lack money, that they lack good housing, that they lack good clothing, that they lack good food. Of course, but that is not what poverty is. That's the consequence of being poor. And when we confuse the consequence with the cause, then we are in trouble. And that's why we cannot remove poverty. We need to go and tap into the other problems to really start changing the consequence. When people start not feeling isolated, but as part of a community that really offers protection, absence of fear, a sense of organization, a sense of achievement. When people stop feeling helpless, when feels the fairness of horizontal relationships and not top-down relationships, when the poor start feeling that they can do and achieve some changes in their environment, then they start dreaming in a better future and they start changing themselves. What we are seeking is for transformation, a transformation that comes from within, a transformation where the poor is taking responsibility for the steps that are necessary to get out of that situation. But sustainable transformation happens then when they teach the next generation or those who come after them the same skills. And then you see a chain reaction. It's not just one go. It's something that happens and happens again, happens again. It's like gunpowder that you put a match to and it goes igniting and igniting, yes, one after the other, because now there is fire.